My name is Alan Skillicorn. I'm a state representative for this area. I think there's some people that might be out of the district, which is fine. This is all good information. There's a couple things that we're going to be going over this evening, and one of them is a little bit about the Algonquin Township property taxes. And just so you know, the deadline for appealing that assessment is coming up very soon. A couple months ago when I was talking to the county assessor, he was saying that the should come out mid-September. I just checked even just today, and the property assessments have not come out yet, the value assessments, but they should be coming out very, very soon. And then there's only a 30-day window to appeal your assessment. So if you look at that assessment and don't think it's right, and you look up your neighbors and see that there's a discrepancy there, that's when you can figure out if that's a good idea or not. And I'll let our assessor guest go into those details a little bit more, but just let you know that there's just a 30-day window every year, and it's a good idea to take a look at your assessment and maybe a couple of your neighbors with comparable properties, just to make sure everything is fine. And the business of assessing properties, in my opinion, is getting better and better. I personally have seen mine, and I haven't seen a reason to appeal my taxes because it's been assessed fairly. Compared to my neighbors, and we're exactly the same. And that's really the big thing to take a look at. But we'll get into that. But we're also going to talk about why our property taxes are so high. And some of it has to do with there's really bad laws in Springfield, what we can do to reform that. We're going to actually show some of the people that are getting breaks that we aren't getting. And then at the end, I'm just going to talk about what we can do to keep our local governments accountable. So property taxes don't go to the state. Property taxes go to your local governments. And we're going to talk about how we can keep them accountable, and that's where the big money really is when it's concerning property taxes. I'm going to try to keep things moving along quickly as possible. I know this is opening night for the Blackhawks, and I want to respect that. So very quickly, some of the history of property taxes here in Illinois. So the state used to have a personal property tax, but it wasn't until, we didn't always have property taxes, just so you know. And this is just some of the details to that. We got rid of that personal property tax in 1970, or we changed it basically. So we have the current situation. But if you look at that there, we still didn't have homestead exemptions. We still didn't have senior exemptions. And things have changed. A big thing that happened in the 90s was the property tax caps, which is PTEL. And to give you an idea, that was designed in a situation where you have an inflationary market. So if property values are going up every single year, it put caps on the local units of government raising their levies. It was never designed to work in a deflationary market. So when we had the great collapse of 2008, 2009, 2010, that's where a lot of our property taxes would start going way up. Because you had the big drivers of those local property taxes, the local units of government, your school districts, they still set the levy, and even though our property values went down, the levies still kept on going up. And that's why we had such an explosion of our property taxes in the past, say 12 years. And we're still paying for that today. Personally, I advocate that we should give homeowners a break on that. That's why I've been advocating for freeze the levy. There's a situation where levies kept on going up, even though our property values were going down. Our investments became liabilities, and unfortunately, some of the local spending kept on going up and up. And I've always been a critic of that. Been able to do that in my own hometown, but I'm trying to push out a bigger regional effort. So we're going to get into that a little bit later, and I think we're going to go over to Warren's presentation now. So I do want to welcome, so Julie, and everybody here, Julie Schmidt here is my district director. A lot of times she's the person answering phone calls in the office when I'm in Springfield and such. Does a great job. Has been a great servant to the community. Pleasure to work with her. And I also want to introduce Warren Dixon right now. And Warren is just one of the foremost experts on property taxes and why they're so high. So I personally invited him. He doesn't live in McHenry County. He doesn't live in this district, but he knows his stuff. He's been keeping some of the politicians accountable for the past few years, and I thought it was a perfect opportunity. This is a big issue. Most people in this room pay just as high property taxes as their mortgages. If you've owned your home a long time and your mortgage is paid off or almost paid off, you probably pay higher property taxes than your mortgage. And this is a gentleman that can really help us understand the issue and has been leading for a while. So I just wanted to invite him out. So I want to welcome Warren Dixon right now.
Thanks, Alan. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here this evening. I have had the luxury of being up here numerous times with family, and then owning an appraisal business, doing a number of appraisal work up here. So, like Alan said, my name's Warren Dixon. I'm the current Naperville Township Assessor in DuPage County. I'm heading into my second elected term. This is my 23rd year, though, of doing real estate appraisal or mass appraisal. I've worked in multiple townships. I've worked on boards of review, and I'm a owner of quite a large appraisal and property tax consulting business. So I've had the luxury and the opportunity to sit around that table. So to sit on the side of the assessor's office, to sit on the side of the board of review, to sit on the side of you, the appellants in those particular appeals. So got a great feel of kind of what's going on. I've also had the luxury to work statewide with representatives like Representative Skillicorn. I've worked with representatives on both sides of the aisle in regards to property tax matters and consult on both sides. So I was recently appointed on the Governor Rounder's Executive Order Task Force on Local Government Consolidation and Unfunded Mandates, looking at some of the drivers of the cost of expenses. So, and we became, that sprung out a number of different initiatives statewide. And so we're going to talk a little bit about today why you're here. And the main reason why you're here, and we come up to McHenry County, and we come up to Lake County, and we come up to the other counties, some of the highest property taxes in the nation, if not the highest property taxes in the nation. So what we want to do is we want to find out why. Oh. Down arrow? Got it. There we go. So we're going to leave it, Alan and myself are going to leave enough time to ask a bunch of questions afterwards, so we'll feel free to jump in. We'll leave plenty of time to do that. But what we want to discuss this evening is give you an overview of the Illinois property tax system. We'll make sure that you're in the best position from an assessment standpoint. That means your value's there, you're receiving all the exemptions that you got, you are possibly in the best position you are from an assessment standpoint. We're going to talk a little bit about the taxing bodies, their levies, and what they ask for, and how that impacts property taxes. And we're going to really talk about the two major impacting factors in the state of Illinois on property taxes. We're going to look at trends and solutions and some recent impacting legislation that kind of where things are going here in the future, what to expect, how bad is it going to be, or how good can it get, where are we going to go. So I have an example up here of DuPage County, but this is for the rest of this is for the state. So who are the players in the property tax cycle? State legislatures will set the property tax code. They're going to make law that governs how I assess properties, how taxing bodies can levy. Alan talked a little bit about PTAL, those types of laws setting extension limitation laws. So PTAL is a property tax extension limitation law that was put in 1991. It limited the amount that you can extend from the highest of the last 3 years, either the consumer price index or 5%, whichever one's lower. So that was some things that have gone into place along with the laws that we deal with. Each taxing body sets a levy. That's what they ask for from 1 year to the next. We have home rule taxing bodies, and we have ones that are under PTAL rule. So home rule means that they're not limited, and then the PTAL would be like your school districts, your counties, your townships typically that are PTAL limited. They can only ask for so much from 1 year to the next. County Supervisors of Assessment, they are an arm or a division of the Illinois Department of Revenue for equalization factors and equalization between townships. That's because taxing bodies run between different counties and different townships. County Boards of Review, they hear appeals on assessment, and the county clerk will ultimately collect all the levies, accumulate the levies against the assessments, to come up with a tax rate. That tax rate's then applied to your assessed valuation to create amount in a tax bill, and your treasurer is going to send out your bill. Those are the players. So let's talk about assessed valuation before we get into exemptions first. So from an assessed valuation standpoint, it's a pretty objective process. When an assessor's setting it, I see a fellow assessor here in the audience. I see a former assessor here also from DuPage County. When we're looking at and we're determining valuations from 1 year to the next, it's a pretty objective process. We're looking at homes, if it's a residential property, homes of similar size, quality, in the same location to yours. Those assessment jurisdictions should probably pretty uniformly. If they don't put it online, they should be able to outline that. You come into their office, you say, what did you compare it to? Well, we've got 12, 15 sales in the subdivision here. This is what we use. This one's a little bigger, this one's a little smaller, this one backs a busy road, this one backs an open area. Fairly objective. No assessor has any reason to be wrong with their valuations when they come up there. So you can do that. The first check is you want to see if you can go to your website, pull that information off of the recent sales in their subdivision. If not, call the local assessment jurisdictions. They'll help you out in finding and determining what your value should be at. You want to start that process. Probably I heard the values here in the Algonquin Township are starting to come in. You want to give them a call now and say, where do you think my value is going to go? Okay, to get a kind of a heads up before that 30-day process goes. So most assessors like to get that call and find out what, you ask them, where do you think it's going to go? What's the factor or multiplier the township is receiving this year? A factor or a multiplier is a percentage of increase or decrease of all the sales weighted in the township that you either have to come up or down to get to, let's just call it 100% of market value, but you're at a third of market value. So to bring it up to 1/3 of market value, that bulk of sales in a sales ratio study will tell you where you got to go. You want to make sure you're availing yourself of all your exemptions. There's a couple exemptions. Everybody receives, as a homeowner, will receive a general exemption of $6,000 off their assessed valuation if it's owner occupied. Seniors then also receive another $5,000 exemption if owner occupied by December 31st. Senior assessment freezes are very important. Owner occupied 65 plus by December 31st. Must be owner of record on January 1, the prior 2 years. Household income this year in 2017 not to exceed $55,000. So not to exceed $55,000. Next year, new legislation will go through that will change that household income to $65,000. Question.
For the owner occupant assessment, if there's multiple owners, do they all have to be over 65?
No, just one, but the total household income would have to be, from a senior freeze standpoint, would have to be 60 or 55,000 or under. That's total household income. The local assessor's office can help you out that, or the supervisor of assessment office would be more than happy to help you with those questions. Home improvement exemptions in the state of Illinois outside of Cook County. Home improvement exemptions, if you improve your property they'll give you an exemption up to $75,000 of market value for 4 years. That's usually 4 years after the completion of the construction. So if you complete something here in October, they will start that the following year. So you'll get a couple months in addition to that 4-year period of time. So that exemption will reduce off the total valuation for 4 years. That exemption's initiated by your local assessment jurisdictions without you having to do anything. The residential exemption and the home improvement exemption are initiated by the local assessment jurisdictions without you having to do anything. You just want to make sure that they are on there.
Somebody does a project that's up to $45,000 of improvement to that.
Up to $75,000 market.
75,000.
Well, you can get an exemption. You can do more. So let's say you do a $200,000 improvement on your property. You're going to get $75,000 of market value exempted from the assessed valuation for the next 4 years.
Or if you do something you get 20 to 45,000.
If you do anything below it, it'll just adjust below it. So if you do 10,000, it'll be 10,000, so on and so forth. So,
4 years.
and you'll receive the benefit for 4 years. Yep.
Is that 75,000 for 4 years or 75,500 for 4 years?
No, it's each year. So whatever the value is, if the value is attributable, if you put on a $60,000 addition on your property and we value it at $60,000, you're going to get $20,000 assessed because it's a third of market value for 4 years. There's disabled persons exemptions. Any veterans in here, thank you for your service. I see a gentleman in the front. Thank you very much for your service. There's a new exemption that's up to a total complete exemption of paying no exemption you completely of all assessed valuation, hence no taxes if you're 70% disabled or more. Returning veterans of $5,000. So what do exemptions do? Exemptions do not change the total taxable askable amounts by the taxing bodies. So the school districts or the township or the fire district or the municipalities ask for dollars. When an exemption comes off one property, it moves that, reduces the total amount that is divided into, and it exempts it and moves it, kind of shifts it off to the remaining businesses or the remaining residential properties. It's just this shift. Exemptions increase the rate. Exemptions do not increase the total amount of real estate taxes collected. Like I said, it's a shift. And there. Some other things to be aware of that impact, we don't know about, that impact property taxes that we don't see. Farm valuation, open space. Someone comes out and develops a farm field here and puts in a residential subdivision. There's preferential farm value on properties that's substantially lower than market value. It's based on soil productivity rates and yields. I have a great example of a property down in my township on the corner of Route 59 and 75th Street in Naperville, prime real estate property. It's a quarter section, 125 acres. They've got a tax bill of $5,600 because it's farm valuation. They've got an assessed valuation preferential of about $160,000 that generates that $5,600 tax bill. So that property is receiving that benefit. If it was on the tax rolls, it would be a $300,000 an acre property and would take up an additional, $2 million in property taxes, which would reduce everybody else by $2 million of property tax. So there's a balance between why they put in farm valuation and they don't. But you might see a developer's relief situation where they are developing a farm. They're going to receive the beneficial value of that farm value until occupancy on each one of the units. Open space, a lot of your golf courses, so on and so forth, receive benefits of open space, veterans, historical, and those are all shifting of the property tax burden also. This is the nitty-gritty, and we're going to get into reasons why property taxes go up, but we want to get through some of this too. So if you feel and you go through the process that you've talked to your local assessment jurisdiction, and usually they have no reason to not be transparent and to put out that information for you and say, we use these 6 homes, or we use these 7 homes of similar size and quality, or we use these 2 gas stations if you're a gas station owner comparing to yours, or we use this office building, so on and so forth. Well, the first step is you want to initiate a conversation with your local assessment office. 96% of appeals plus are taken care of at the local assessment jurisdiction. No cost to you. You don't have to spend a dime. You go in and talk to your local assessor's jurisdiction. We don't set policy. We don't get any more tax dollars. Our only objective is to be fair and accurate. We're measured on our accuracy and our fairness. So we all, as fellow assessors, look at our coefficients of dispersion, our rates, our levels of assessment, meaning how accurate are we and how fair we are. So start that initial process. I tell people to call sometime in May, June, and find out when they're going to close their books, and then try to ask them where you're going to be at from that standpoint.
Question.
Yep.
Or do you want me to hold it until the end?
No, go ahead.
You've heard about, I don't know if it's individuals or companies that will appeal your real estate tax on your behalf.
Yes.
What do you know about that? Is that just to make it more convenient? Is there a fee? Is it an up and up thing?
Well, I think we're going to get into it a little bit more too, and I think we're going to talk about it on a high level, and we're going to talk about it on this level too. But there's a number. Property tax representation is a big business, and there's a lot of dollars that are made in the property tax business, and there's a lot of really good property tax reps. But I believe at the first level, you have a very high level of assessment individuals that are in the business now, and they have a lot of transparency, data, modernization of technology allows us to get that information to you. Start the process at no charge to lay out. You know the value of your homes. You know the value of your homes better than anybody does. You've been watching what the neighbor's selling for. You've seen what the one house went down, who's got it listed. That when you've been in their house, they got granite, they got this, they got that. You know what it is, so you've got a good feel. So when you walk into that assessor's office at no charge, you just say, I just feel based on these homes that my house is overvalued. And they'll listen to you. And we're not always right. I assess 35,000 parcels and $12 billion in real estate annually. We have the third largest commercial jurisdiction in the state of Illinois. They're big things. We're not always right. So from a property tax standpoint, if you get to a point where you are in a complex property, I would say that you potentially might be looking at representation at that point. But for a typical residential property, everybody should start with their local assessor's office. I think they'll see a very open process and very transparent way of looking at it. So I wouldn't.
And then if you do get, you appeal and it's accepted or whatever, is that just for one calendar year?
Well, most of the time when we do make an adjustment, we'll make an adjustment for a reason. Because when someone appeals a property and I don't feel it's fair and equitable, I feel that if I feel it's fair and equitable, I feel I've got your property fairly assessed, but you think it's not, I'm going to defend it on behalf of everybody else, because as a reduction here, it's going to shift it off there. So we do, a lot of our local assessment jurisdictions do a lot of work at defending on your behalf. So you don't see all the work that we do to defend from that side. But when an assessor makes an adjustment, they're going to make it for a reason, and that should carry forward each year, and that assessor will look at what the market's doing from one year to the next. But adjustments are made for many different reasons. It could be a conditional adjustment. The house is run down, it's got a foundational issue, it's got that might require reinspection, might be looking at that. But if there's an adjustment because there was an error or it was out of line with the market, most likely it'll carry forward for at least what we call a quadrennial period of time, is every 4 years everybody receives a notice. All right, and if you're in the middle of that, so it should carry forward to the next quad, then you might readjust and you might have to initiate that conversation again, but it should carry forward.
So you shouldn't need to do it.
You shouldn't need to do it, no. What are grounds for an appeal? Overvaluation. You want to make sure that you're in line with the market, you're not over the market. What trumps overvaluation is equity. That's the biggest thing in valuation from an assessment side. That's what we're fighting statewide, is have an equitable system, not only here in McHenry County, but we want to see equity in Cook County, we want to see equity in DuPage County, we want to see it southern Illinois, because we want to play on the same field. But so from an equity standpoint, locally, and talking at a very local level, is you want to see if you've got 4 homes that are similar, they should all be similarly assessed too. Contention of law would be a item of law, open space, farm valuation. I believe I should get farm valuation. I feel I should get open space, a model home exemption. That would be a contention. Not my taxes are too high. We all agree taxes are too high. I'm going to save time and go through some of this. This is all in the presentation there. Second step, if you don't feel that you said that assessor is full of it, he doesn't know what he's talking about, you can go to the Board of Review. Local Board of Review here in McHenry County. It's a very informal process. You'll sit in front of a couple hearing officers. They'll ask you why you feel your assessment's not fair and equitable. They'll ask the assessor's office why they feel it's fair and equitable. They'll hear the case, and then they'll render a judgment there at that time. If you don't feel you get a decision back from your local county Board of Review. You don't feel that, you have the right to go to the Property Tax Appeal Board, which is kind of oddly named, right? Because we can't appeal our taxes, but we can appeal our valuation. So a lot of times you'll hear folks running around saying, how do I appeal my taxes? Well, you can't appeal your taxes. You can appeal what your valuation is. And you have the right. That's also an pretty informal process. The state comes up to the local counties. The state hearings will be here in McHenry County locally. So now the fun part. That's kind of the nitty-gritty. Make sure that you're where you're at from an assessment standpoint. We want to make sure that you're in line with the market value, you're uniform with everybody else. that you're receiving the proper exemptions, and you're going from there. But let's talk about what's really impacting your property taxes and why we're all here today and saying, why are taxes going up so much? What's that impact? What recently happened to increase property taxes? So, two things. I've got a chart up here that goes into the assessed valuations in the loop, the Chicago loop, in relationship to the recent sales of some of the largest properties in Chicago. Well, the two impacting factors, the largest impacting factors in property taxes, and I'll just outline them right now and we'll work through them. The biggest impacting factor in your property taxes is your tax base. It's the real estate tax base that you currently have or you don't have for that matter. Up here in McHenry County in 2007, the commercial industrial base accounted for about 40% of the total equalized assessed valuation here. It's about that statewide too. Today, it accounts for about 33% of value. So that commercial industrial value has dropped substantially, shifting the burden off onto the remaining residential properties and on the remaining businesses. So no levies changing hands. If everybody didn't ask for anything more, the school districts, the municipalities, they didn't ask for a dime more, you're substantially picking up more because of the change in the economy. When you see vacant strip centers, when you don't see office buildings being built, you see the retail footprint changing, online sales, office campuses not there any longer, those type of things substantially absorb the levy and shift the levy off a residential property. So the shrinkage of that commercial industrial base here in McHenry County, not only there but in the state of Illinois, has the largest impacting factor to property taxes. Second is, where do those property taxes go? And we'll talk about the second biggest impacting factor is public education funding and how we fund public education, or the percentage of that, because it's going to be the largest percentage of your property tax bill. Where I'm from in DuPage County, it's about 73% of our property tax bill. Up here, I think it's closer to 80%. That's because we just don't have the tax base up here that you have in surrounding areas where we have tax bases of BP Amicos and Nelco chemicals and those type of properties that shift the base off. Recently, we voted on a new school funding formula. School funding formula was based on a foundational component of EAV, Equalized Assessed Valuation, or local area resources. That formula set a ability to pay and placed you in a tier system, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or tier 4 position, tier 1 receiving the largest amount of funding. I think Alan can speak to that. Some of our contentions of why our taxes were going up out here was because the state dollars were being diverted inequitably to Cook County because of the undervaluation of the Chicago Loop, the understatement of the Chicago Loop. CPS, the Chicago Public School System, receives $2.1 billion annually from the state of Illinois because of that tier 1 position. Now we're going to go through some properties on here, and this one's really hard to see, but I think you got a list in front of you that's got a lot of those properties too. But I think everybody recognizes that first property that's out there. Willis Towers, Sears Tower. That property sold in March of 2015 for $1.3 billion. My colleague, Joe Barrios, the Cook County assessor, has that today valued at $580 million, or only 45% of market value. That goes to the understatement of value. And understating equalized assessed valuation in that school funding formula says that they are poverty poor versus poverty rich. You'll see the development that's going on in the Chicago Loop when they're sucking businesses across our counties into the city. There's another really predominant property down in the city, 300 North LaSalle, sold in 2014, July, for $850 million. It's valued today at $352, or 46% of market value. I could go on and on. 353 Clark, $750 15 million, 306 million. It's valued at 43%. So Chicago schools get a lifeline from the state to cover pension costs. They get a $400 million bailout, and state legislator tells you that, well, it was a good deal because your school districts were held harmless. They got the same amount of money. Well, they should have got the bailout, as Representative Skillicorn has said. They should have got those, you guys should have got the money that went and bailed them out to reduce your property taxes out here. I should have got it down in DuPage County. They should have got it down in Southern Illinois. They should have got it out there. They also shouldn't be in they shouldn't be in a tier 1 position and receiving $2.1 billion, which should come back to you guys in McHenry County and reduce your property taxes. So we're looking to get to an equitable position. We keep fighting and fighting to make sure that we have an equitable assessment system. Valuation's valuation. It's a pretty objective process that we can go through.
I have a couple of questions. One is, if I'm understanding you correctly, when they're undervaluing these properties and they're paying less taxes, then the residential taxpayers have to pay more. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's a
How can we fight the undervaluation of a property that's not ours?
Well, your taxing body should fight undervaluation. They have the right to intervene on each one of these particular properties. They should go and intervene on behalf of you, the taxpayers. Your boards have represented you. They go in and they file an intervention, and they appeal the assessed valuation and say it's not fair and equitable. You go to your school boards and tell them that you want them to intervene, and if you're not going to elect the school boards, if you're not going to do it. You also get your state representatives, which have done a good job to start to pressure the system for a fair and equitable system, asking for an audit. Representative Jeannie Ives out of Wheaton has asked for an audit by the Illinois Department of Revenue to audit the Cook County commercial valuation. I just had Jason Grotto in my office multiple times over the last 3 weeks. If you saw a 3-piece article that went out on the inequity of assessments in residential property in Cook County, stating that they were overvaluing the minority or the poor areas of Cook County and undervaluing the higher ones. Well, like you said, that's one component. You're overvalued in relationship to the market, but what you're really getting killed on is when you undervalue the Sears Tower, you really push the rate up, the rate that everybody, so you get hit from one side, you get hit from another side. So those homeowners in Cook County are getting hit too and killed from a residential standpoint competitively.
Now, when those are undervalued like that, is the tax burden shifted across the tax base or just to the residential?
It's across the tax base, but the residential is weighted at about, in Cook County, it's weighted at about 80%. Out here, we're at 96. In DuPage County, you're probably a little higher than that. So.
Now, I've noticed one of the things politicians will do to bring in new jobs is to tell corporations, well, if you'll locate here, we'll waive your taxes or we'll give you a big tax break. But that means the residential people are picking up the taxes they should have been paying, doesn't it?
It does. It goes into economic development zones, TIFs. We'll talk a little bit about TIFs too, but as you defer the taxes off, that means that they're not taking their share of the taxes for that particular time. So there's good things, some good to that, some bad to it. I think it's not a one-fit-all in those particular cases. What I can tell you is that Cook County is in a very strongly advantaged position to attract business and corporation in regards to McHenry County. They have 145 TIF districts. They have undervaluation of commercial properties. They'll tell you that the tax rates are 3% and 4% because if you divide it into that $1.3 billion that the Willis Towers sold, and he's only got it at $580 million, you take their taxes and that building pays about $29 million in taxes annually. Take 29 and divide it into 580 million is a lot different than dividing in the 1.3 billion, right? So I've got a 4% at 580, but when I really put it at 1.3, I'm under 2%. The national average is 2.5%. So we're not talking about driving good businesses and good corporations that create jobs that some of us commute back and forth to and sustain our regional community. We're just talking about playing on a fair playing field. So from there, you can see that here. There's the development that's going on in the city is no little plans more than 20 billion of mega projects. There's 10 projects over $1 billion currently going on there. They bring in Amazon, and if you hear them cry property poor, boy, we need to stand up and say, you're not property poor, you can handle your fair share, okay? We want the same playing field. That's the way you get real substantial property tax reductions out here, is by getting the base correct and allowing them. Now, the state of Illinois has challenges itself. The amount that they fund public education, or they prioritize funding public education, is much lower than many other states, though it's gotten better. It's gotten better and better, and there's challenges to that. But the more that the state can fund public education at a higher level and prioritize education, that means your property tax is going to be reduced, reaching for less and less for property taxes to fill that gap. Also, from a municipal standpoint, one of their biggest funding mechanisms is sales tax, right? So when you're reducing these businesses and these corporations out us, and you see retail centers going dark, and you see stores going dark, and you see car dealerships leaving, substantial property sales tax revenues, that means the municipalities have less sales tax to deal with, and they've got to reach further for property taxes. Your property taxes are going to go up. Massive development plan for Chicago River's North Branch. Downtown sales hit record $6.1 billion. All right, so you heard everybody in that last round about, oh, we can't open our schools, we're not going to be able to do all the stuff, we don't have enough money, we need help from the state, they've got to bail us out, they got to pay for our pension liabilities. It gets worse when we get to TIFs, but they have all the local resources in just Chicago to bail themselves out, to fund their schools without asking for a dime from us out in the collar counties. They don't need a dime. They should never ask us for a dime. They're some of the most wealthy properties in the United States, and we want them to play on a fair and equitable playing field. And so we're keeping the push on to do that. 52 cranes in the air. It says the Windy City's leading the nation when it comes to number of residential construction cranes in the air. They're not poor. So back to really what's affecting your property taxes. And a lot of folks lose track of this, and Alan's done a good job of keeping perspective on really what's impacting your property taxes overall in the big scope of things. So you hear a lot of things. You hear, well, there's way too many units of government, right? We got more 7,000 units of government. Well, I sat on the task force of local government consolidation. I'll tell you, we have more than 10,000 units of government in there that we went through. I went through a year process. We got more than 10,000 units of government. The units can get top heavy. We can have efficiencies, but what we find is we can find consolidation and shared services from the ground up and locally through those particular property. But when your property tax bill and where your property taxes go accounts for 73% in one taxing body, or out here and 80% in one taxing body, we really got to address where that one taxing unit, right? So we want to address how those are funded. And that goes to the equity of the school funding formula. It goes to holding our districts accountable, and it looks for our state to prioritize spending on education. Couple that with the biggest impacting factor, we need to be pro-business, we need to be business friendly, we need to grow and diversify the Illinois economy, the Illinois property tax base. You want to make sure your local municipalities and your counties are strong in their land planning. When they build too much residential property too fast, that incurs the biggest expenses into the community. So if you see subdivision after subdivision going up and you don't see a warehouse, or you don't see an office building, or you don't see something going in to offset some of that, you are going to substantially pay more in property taxes, because that's a big driver into the school systems that will do that. So that will drive your property taxes up. You see your sales tax revenues decline. Municipalities, counties, states are going to have to deal with the changing of the economic model, the retail model. It's not, my wife has Christmas come to my door. I see so many boxes show up at the door. So our groceries come to our door. Those things will change what the real estate footprint has in the near future, and it's doing it now, and that's going to impact your property taxes.
What do you mean when you say be more business friendly? Because when I hear politicians giving speeches about business friendly, it always refers to lowering business taxes, which means it shifts the burden onto us.
Well, I think being business friendly, and I think Representative Skillicorn could talk a little bit more to it, but I think we have opportunities for wins in workers' compensation here in Illinois. I think we have bipartisan support of initiatives that can make us more friendly from a manufacturing standpoint here in Illinois. I think that we can lower, we can work to lower property tax rates for businesses coming in. We've got pension reform is ripe, I think, to put us in a bigger position. I think there was bipartisan support 4 years ago or 3 years ago when we came in. Those sides have kind of divided, whatever side you are, if you're on there, they've kind of decided, but there is a win on a new pension system that can actually, move forward with keeping benefits and moving forward on that. So
When you say pension reform, what do you mean? Business will pay less toward pensions and will pay more toward pensions?
no, I don't think so. I think, and I'll let the politicians speak a little bit more to it, but I think that there's a modernization of the pension system that becomes more of a sustainable pension position going forward, and I think that means giving and maintaining the pension benefits that are currently there, but looking at what new pension systems for new people coming into the system are. I think technology will drive efficiencies and reducing the ability for the large staffing levels that the government currently has. So I think that all those types of things will be beneficial to it. But we need to be able to track those businesses here. We see our surrounding states increasing their manufacturing jobs at rates that are, extensively higher than what we are doing here in Illinois. So we want to see those bases. Part of my township is the city of Aurora, and I saw the industrial and manufacturing base of that city leave. Now technology's changed that, but other things have. And so we want to see that growth in there. And that has to do with some pro-business policies. And that's not union busting, that's not doing, right to work, that's not all this stuff, but this is finding the medium to be just medium. Let's just call it just average with everybody else. We're just not average anymore. If we were just average, we'd be growing, but we're just not average anymore. So that's about as political as I like to get from my valuation standpoint, but we got to be able to attract the commercial industrial base from that, and we have to have a level playing field between regional areas. Okay, I was just with Aaron Lawler, the county executive for Lake County, and we were talking about regional competition and being able to compete on a level playing field out here in the collar counties versus the incentives that they have in Cook County. So let's talk a little bit about, we'll talk about TIFs and the impacts of TIFs and what that did into your property taxes in Cook County. So this one's really hard to see, but the first slide here is 1980, and that's how many, the blue area is how many TIFs there were in Cook County at that particular time in 1980. And I think the last one's 2015 today. And so you can see the immense amount of growth. So let's talk, what's a TIF? A TIF's a tax increment financing district. What that does is an economic incentive zone for municipalities, or a tool that municipalities can use to capitalize on the growth of an area and the increment above where property is frozen at the assessed valuation of the starting of the TIF year. So if the start TIF year is 2015, the assessed valuations are frozen at that level. Any development after that, the full rate goes directly to the municipal coffers or to the municipality. To qualify for a TIF, you have to be in a blighted area or a conservation area, and that's very laxed criteria that they have. So LaSalle Street out in the heart of business district is in a TIF. 1 in every 4 properties in Chicago are now in a TIF. So David Orr said, Chicago TIFs generate a record $561 million last year. That's what went into the city in addition. And when the city's receiving the $561 million, 60% of that tax bill would have gone to the Chicago public school system at that time, which would have been less. They would have had to ask for the state of Illinois, and hence would have been more that the districts and the counties outside of that. So 1 in every 4 properties is located in there. Chicago TIFs generate $561 million in tax revenue in its 145 TIF districts. We also found out in the school funding formula that the TIF valuation or the TIF increment above there, the growth in that, so when Trump Towers goes up in a TIF district, and it used to be the old Sun Times building, and it's sitting there, and now it goes up, and it's got a valuation of, an $850 million building there, and it was only a valuation of about a $100 million building before. That $700 million was not accounted for in the school funding formula or in the wealth of area valuations. They did get some concessions on a TIF commission that will come out of the school funding bill.
The TIFs though go across the state, right?
TIFs are utilized by everybody in the state. It's it does. So there's good TIFs and bad TIFs. If they are utilized correctly in a blighted area where there's not going to be development, where it's going to be stagnant, and it's going to have some kind of incentive to develop or rejuvenate that area, TIFs typically run 23 years. They're set by legislature. They're petitioned by the municipality to the state legislator to initiate that 23-year TIF. And then that might be a good proposal that it would ultimately create an incentive there. So there are good, of those 145, there are good TIFs. There's bad TIFs. A lot of these TIFs keep getting renewed and renewed and renewed, on and on and on. Yeah, so the taxing body still will ask for the same amount based on PTEL, right? So they're going to ask for the same amount, but they've only got the ability, the school district, to ask on the capped increment. So the below increment, the prior to, okay? The municipality gets the full rate of the increment plus. So they are able to benefit from the increase. If they were able to get the taxing bodies like the fire protection district or the library district or the school district was able to put that equalized assessed component into there, that would distribute that levy, okay? It would spread it out further and would be less of a burden on the residential and the business properties. Okay, so you had that, it increases the tax base, like we said, the most important things, the tax base. What a TIF does is just cap the tax base for that particular taxing body, particularly the school district, lowers their tax base, doesn't give them the increment, and then increases the rate that they would have and what everybody else has to pay from there. The problem that they had in Chicago is that there has to be, within the TIF agreements, there have to be qualified projects, what they're putting these dollars for infrastructure improvements, parking garages, building finance improvements. It's very broad where this is going, and the dollars are being ported. They're being ported between, if a TIF district touches one, they can move the dollars back and forth throughout there. Particularly out here in the suburbs and the collar counties, our TIF districts don't touch. So they're identified projects. They create that project, whether it be wetlands or infrastructure or parking garages or lighting. They're pretty strictly defined for the most part. A little bit more abusive here. We just recently saw, I don't know if I put the slide up there, but we recently saw them moving McCormick Place TIF dollars over to Navy Pier. So some of the poorer South Side neighborhoods had a TIF established, and they were utilizing that for development in the Navy Pier. It kind of put a lot of big pressure on the TIF conversation. I left this in here from the difference between assessment systems and the appeal rates. Cook County is the largest assessment jurisdiction in the United States at 1.8 million parcels. They have the largest jurisdiction. They have 22% of their parcels appealed annually. So you can see that the disenfranchisement of, that's about 450,000 parcels appealed annually. Out here in McHenry, I'm not sure the rate. In DuPage County, we have 2% of parcels appealed annually. I think it's close to 5% out here in McHenry. So you can see that the assessment jurisdictions in the surrounding areas are typically reaching a more transparent and accurate assessment level, getting you closer to 100% of market value, or the businesses closer to 100% of market value, where Cook County has a very diverse and inaccurate system that's ultimately impacting you and your property taxes. So if you can take anything out of the discussion, we hear a lot of things about property taxes and what's impacting our property taxes. The largest impacting factor in our property taxes is our property tax base. We need to grow that base and keep that base diversified between commercial and industrial property. And then how do we, our biggest component, public education, are we receiving our fair share of taxes for that, or are we paying for other folks like Cook County is, which we were just recently bailed out. So, question in the back.
Sort of, not sure how to state it, but with the Trump proposal about lowering business taxes, is that affecting this in general for the fact that if he's lowering, you said the tax base was 40% for businesses, I thought? And I might be wrong with the number, but if he's lowering it down to 32 or 33, or whatever his proposals are going to be, then that basically means that more onus is going to be put on homeownership as well. Is that correct or not? I know that's sort of new news, but I'm just wondering if the revenue being reduced for tax bases for businesses is going to affect all of us too, right?
Well, we want to see growth of the tax. We want to see growth of the business base. We want to see more of a footprint come in, jobs, building, growing the base. We want to see manufacturing come back. We want to see those types of capitalizing on sectors that are growing in the marketplace, high-tech sectors, medical sectors. You see Amazon's coming in and building warehouses, development, those types of things. So any kind of incentive that's going to grow business is going to be good. Now, there's got to be a balance, right? So, I mean, there's a balance between growing business and growing wages and growing, doing all those types of things.
The bottom line is if the businesses don't come in and see an incentive, and we do lower business taxes, before you're saying, okay, to draw them in to get more businesses to come. But if it doesn't happen, and they lower the tax structures for everybody in the United States, and corporations start saying Illinois is a bad place to come to begin with, there's a hypothetical, and they lower across the country to 32-33%, that means we're going to have to absorb 5 to 10% increase of what the businesses are going to lose.
I can question the specifics of that anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
When your questions are answered.
Great.
It seems to me that increasing the business base, if they're not gonna pay their fair share, that's gonna hurt us, not help us.
Well, I think everybody pays their fair share. We want to play on one level field. So what we ask for too, Cook County's on a different assessment system, so they're basing their residential property on a 25% percentage, 10%. But what we do is everybody from a valuation or assessment standpoint is going to pay their fair share. So if it's based on value, they're going to pay.
You said a lot of these properties are way, undervalued. They're not paying their fair share if their property's undervalued.
They're not in Cook County, where they're not paying their fair share. But if we can get to we can get to a level playing field, and we can get properties valued within the range of value, everybody will pay their fair share. So what we're pushing for is those properties to be that Assessor Barrios go through and audit his properties and get those there. Not only will that impact you from a school funding position, but that will also that'll lower.
Not us.
Well, it will impact you. If we raise the commercial valuation to the Chicago Loop, which is undervalued by anywhere between 60%, as high as 60% undervaluation, and this is pulling thousands and thousands of properties, that we have not seen values change over 3 triennial periods of reassessment. They reassess in 20, so if their valuation was 500,000, it was 500,000 3 years later, and 500,000 3 years later. Jason Grotto is going to come out with it this month in an article in the Chicago Tribune that's going to show that Assessor Barrows hasn't changed values from one triennial to the next, over 3, in some of the most volatile real estate markets that the United States history has ever seen. So we can get them, we can push them. Representative Skillicorn, Democrats from the south suburbs that are in rates that are in Calumet City that are paying 20 and 30% tax rates are on board too. And I think one thing you'll see is the equity of assessments be pressured here in Illinois. It's got great bipartisan support. Valuation is valuation. Okay, we should be able to see when a property sells for $1.3 billion that we should be somewhere in the ballpark of that valuation, and we should get there. Question in the far back.
Doesn't the state apply a multiplier to Cook County between their assessments up to hypothetically 33 and 30% market value?
They do. Every county receives a multiplier. Every township out here receives a multiplier. But that multiplier is a weighted multiplier based on 1.8 million parcels. And so when you accumulate and put everything in one bowl for all of Cook County, you'll get one factor. And that definitely doesn't indicate what, and it's weighted to 80% of the residential properties. Doesn't tell you what commercial industrial property are doing, so there's no way to keep up with that. We also have an indication, we've asked for an audit from the Illinois Department of Revenue. We see over 3 triennial assessment periods that the assessments haven't changed in commercial valuation, and we don't know if they're applying those factors to commercial industrial property.
Can you explain to us how equalizing the field in Cook County would help McHenry County?
State of Illinois sends $1.2 billion of tax dollars for public school funding to the city of Chicago's CPS. And they sent an additional $400 million just recently in a bailout. 2.1 plus $4 million, $400 million of that. If you were to raise the valuations just by 25%, and I said they're anywhere to 60% of valuation, if we were to raise them, they would move from a tier 1 funding position to a tier 4 funding position, and they wouldn't receive a dime of that $2.1 billion. That $2.1 billion would go back into the pool, and each one of your districts out here in McHenry County would receive those dollars, and you would see thousands of dollars off of tax bills, property tax bills. So that's why the undervaluation of the Chicago Cook County system is so important to you. It's the foundational pillar for the school funding formula, which is 80% of your property tax bill. So that's what would impact it.
When a taxing district spans 2 or more counties, how do they determine how much you pay in each county?
That's a great question. That's why we have equalization. So what it's saying is that one county has to do the assessment, so it's equalizing them all up. So we have one of the largest school districts, is it U41, Elgin School District? 46 is in DuPage County, Kane County, Cook County, so we have that crossing multiple districts, and it's a great example of where it is. And the tax bills come out at different times. So what they do is Kane County and DuPage County will set their assessments and get them up to 100%, and then they'll send a corrected bill out in Cook County. Will ultimately adjust that bill, and then maybe you can talk a little bit more to it. But so the equalization factor is actually trying to equalize value based on a sales ratio study so that everybody is at an equalized valuation, except the problem is that that's great at equalizing a residential up or down factor, but the biggest factor that you have, since it's not weighted as commercial industrial property, it only takes accounts, you only get 4% credit for, if it's 96% weighted residential, you're only get a 4% credit for industrial and commercial property. So when you do adjust those, you're never going to see the impact of that. But that's why assessors sometimes that aren't great at doing commercial industrial assessments never raise their assessed valuations or lower them appropriately, and that really impacts your rate.
So who decides all that?
The state of Illinois does the sales ratio studies, and they provide those for each one of the counties. Out in the collar counties that have township assessment jurisdictions, where Cook County has a Cook County assessment jurisdiction, and then you have a local adjustment, they'll give those factors to each one of the assessors. I'll receive a 4% factor, and then I decide between each subdivision or each property type what I'm going to do. I have a diverse township. I have downtown Naperville that they're building $1 million plus, tearing properties down, and they're paying $400,000 and $500,000 for lots, and they're building 1.5 and 2 million, $3 million properties. And then I'm on the far west side of my township. I have the city of Aurora, or Fox Valley Villages, out by Wabansie Valley High School, that's not seeing any appreciation. I've got $130,000 valuations, that some are going down still, some are stagnant. So if none of those properties sell, I got areas where this are going up at 7, 8, 9, 10%, and I got areas that are going down or staying flat. It's the assessor's a good assessor, and we've got some in the room. A good assessor takes those percentages and distributes those across annually. Cook County and other assessors just apply the state factor that they receive across the board to every property. And that's why you see 30 and 40% changes in triennial reassessments. You'll hear neighborhoods, oh my gosh, we went up 30 or 40%. Well, that's because they didn't do anything in the last, they never adjusted to the market. So, in accordance, right there.
It seems like no matter what taxing system you accomplish, if you're gonna still allow these taxing firms to get in there and gerrymander whatever they feel they can get. Madigan and Jackson and Keith Lyons and Hines, how can they be so successful?
So that's a great question. So representation for some of these larger properties in the Cook County that you see, some of the buildings that I just popped up are represented by some quite influential property tax firms. And some of them do a great job, others do it. It's really relying upon the assessor that makes the change is the corruption point. So when we're talking about the corruption point, anybody can ask for any amount of assessment reduction. You can come in and ask me for, any kind of amount. It's up to me at that point to either say yes or no and to defend that. So, but these representation, Madigan and Getstener, the Speaker of the House, Ed Burke, the most powerful alderman in the city of Chicago, as Burke and Plathefter, they represent Trump Towers and more properties than anybody. Crane and Norcross, they have representations as that sit as the chief of staff of Joe Barrios and used to work for their firms. And there's many different people in there. Keith Hines and that. They receive a lot of times 30% of the first year tax savings, up to 50%. Some are on retainers. So it's quite a lucrative business, but it's really the corruption point is at the local assessment jurisdiction. What does that assessor do? And does he fairly and equitably assess property in the range of value? I don't think that I think if we were to raise all these properties, to get all these properties up to market value, these firms would make more money than you've ever imagined. They're not opposed to raising the assessed valuations of the property because they're in the business of reducing these. Commercial industrial properties will vary based on the approaches to value. We're typically valuing these types of properties on the income approach to value, looking at capitalization rates. We're looking on variables that change. A lot of times they're unique properties, so there's always going to be the need for that representation, but we're not even close to the range of value on these properties. We're not even close to the range yet when we're talking that.
Why can't we have a flat 2% rate?
I spent 2 weeks in Indiana studying a lot what happened in Indiana, and when we hear comparisons to Indiana versus Illinois, Indiana was a cost state. They did everything on the cost approach to value. They shifted back in 1998 to a market approach, and they took the operational budgets of the school districts and moved them from the property tax rolls to the state income tax rolls. They left building maintenance and transportation for schools locally in the property tax levies, and they instituted a property tax cap of 2% on residential properties, 3% on commercial properties, or 1% on residential, 2% on commercial, 3% on another. And that ultimately caused a lot of different problems. It instituted state or countywide income taxes came about in those processes too. I think it's part of the discussion that should be had. Can we do that or not? I think it should be a kind of a gauge that you don't pay more than 2% of your property, 2% of your value in property taxes on that. So I think it's probably a good discussion to have, but it's got to be a balance between all those moving components.
Obviously, residents went down in the 9 years I've been here in Algonquin, and, property tax went up. So it seems to me the governmental units should get less and figure out how to work within that. And if it goes, property values go up, great, they get more money.
Yeah, I think that's a big re-education process that we went through in that period of time. Well, they were calling our offices all the time up until 2007 because what was going on, the valuations were going crazy and they were all going up, and the levies were not going up at the rate that the value was going up, so the rate was dropping, and they were calling and saying, call the assessor up because your value is going up. If you want to talk to them, it's their reason, but because the taxes were still going up, right? The rate was going down, but the taxes were going up. Then all of a sudden in 2008, the market fell out. Values started to decline, and the rate went up, started to go up, and what were taxes doing? They were still going up. So it really had to do with the tax base. We're looking at that tax base again, and then, responsibly dealing with the tax levies from one year to the next and holding them accountable. But when you separate certain things from your school funding component, you have pensions in one place and you have your operational expenses in another place, that's quite a diverse balancing act. You don't have to, you worry about the front end, one person runs the front end, they don't have to worry about the back end. So I think shifting those back, getting back to some kind of normalcy will be important too.
When school funding comes from property taxes, doesn't that mean that if you live in a wealthy area, your schools are going to get a lot of tax money? And if you live in a poor area, your schools aren't going to get much tax money?
Yeah, I think funding public education through property taxes is inherently inequitable to start with anyways, but there are solutions to that. The solution right now to that, the answer to that question, the simple question would be to send everything back to the state of Illinois, but Alan will tell you, do you want your dollars being managed here in McHenry County by the state of Illinois right now? No way. So we can't do that. We can't get to that. Question in the back.
Our property taxes have gone, well, like we're at the beginning of where it starts to go up now after that recession. So, I mean, as houses go up, like my house used to be worth like $600,000. Well, now it's worth like $350,000. Right now, I'm praying my house doesn't go up in value because now, say it goes to $600,000, what are your taxes going to be?
Well, if everybody was to go up equally and no one asked for any more dollars,
Yeah, well, that's
so if everybody went up, the values all went up, and the value went there, you'd never pay more than what you paid in the last year. So
you always ask for more.
so they're always going to ask for more, right? So you want to keep those governmental units accountable for what your needs as a community are. So there's some good and some whatever that community needs from that particular point. But it goes to the tax base too. You want to see the diversity of the tax base growing. You don't want to see areas which happened out here in McHenry County and down in Will County and out on the western side of Kane County, where you saw an immense amount of residential stock subdivisions and other subdivisions going up without commercial industrial development. You had no offsets to your cost. You just had residential infrastructure coming in, schools coming in. That's what's really killed you now as the base has started to change. And so what you want to do is you want to see some growth in those sectors, strong land planning. You want to see your communities making sure that they're not just growing to grow, they're responsibly growing is going to be important here in the future. With
I
that.
think it's a great place to transition. And one of the things I've always talked about is control our levies. So keep our local politicians accountable. Just so everyone knows, the middle of December is when the levies are due, or when the local governments need to file their levies. So right now is when your local school board, village board, library board are discussing that. And they'll start discussing that in a public forum next month. So showing up there and just expressing that property taxes are too high and they need to do something about that, and ask them to have some restraint. Ask them to freeze their levy. Ask them to lower their levy. And the way I look at it, since we had the Great Recession, us homeowners are getting double hit on taxes because our property values went down, yet the tax rates went up, the levies continue to grow. Just like your concern of your house value going back up, I fear that too. Situation is that, my house, down, almost 50% from the high. As it starts to creep back up again, I fear that I'm going to have the current higher rate applied to the new higher values. Now, Warren's correct. If everyone's value goes up the same, we're only going to see the incremental increase to the levy. But we all know that some neighborhoods are hotter than others, some neighbors are doing better than others, and he did very much touch on empty storefronts, empty factories. Those are the situations where it really drive property taxes up, because a factory or a storefront doesn't have any children going to schools, so there's no additional cost there, yet they pay a little bit higher than a residential property, and then that lowers your taxes. That's a big deal there too. Just a little bit on this graph here. It's the same one that Warren did, but it's also one we printed out. I did list out those tax firms, and Warren, on these here, I see obviously the Madigan. I know that Speaker Madigan's law firm. But the O'Keefe, Lyons, and Hines, who?
City aldermen, so the City of Chicago aldermen are in that group. And then Crane and Norcross would have ties to the Cook County Assessor's Office.
Okay, so the Joe Barrios office. And unfortunately, you've got private sector property tax attorneys in and out of these offices. I mean, they're in and out of Barrios' office. And I think most people here are pretty familiar with Speaker Madigan and some of the corruption there. I would argue that some of the aldermen, especially Joe Barrios, are worse, and that is very problematic. And these are the people that are really hurting us. So, to give you an idea, that the school funding bill that we just passed, it included, $250 million for Chicago schools for their pension, and we're putting Chicago teachers back into the state pension system. 20 years ago, they asked to be taken out of that, so us, you and me, we gave them a block grant to pay for their pensions. So majority of those years, they shorted the pensions, and it's a bigger burden. Well, now all of us are going to have to pay for that again, so we're being double taxed on that pension. Most of it comes from these properties right here. This is the majority of the problem. This is why not only our income taxes go up, but our property taxes are higher. Now, this new school funding bill, there's actually a mechanism so some districts can actually lower their levies. There is one here in McHenry County. I believe it's District 47. There is a mechanism to allow them to lower their levy and actually pass on the savings to the people. It's a bit convoluted right now. That's something that I've still got to work on how to make that happen. But there is some mechanism to give relief through that. Don't count on it anytime soon. I don't want to give people hope that isn't there, but that's something we got to work on. Part of that bill also was that there's going to be a TIF committee that's formed. So I've formally requested to be on that TIF committee. I'll tell you what, I think the likelihood of me being on the committee is very low because both Governor Rauner's weak on this. I think Speaker Madigan is in with the corruption on this. And so give you an idea on some of this TIF extensions and some of this the TIF that's out there, some of these subsidies. The other side of the aisle likes to complain about that. That's taking away from money from schools and such. But when it comes down to it, when we have the votes, there are only 2 or 3 representatives of 118 that ever vote against them. One of them was myself, and there's a couple others. So most of it is lip service, and there are functional TIFs. If you've got a blighted building, let's say you have a shopping mall that's been closed down for 5 years, it's now dilapidated, it needs a roof. You either need to tear it down and start over, or you need to do some building enhancements to lure businesses back into there. That's a situation where it's legitimately blighted and it might work. The vast majority are not used like that. The vast majority are on buildings that are already functional, properties that are already valuable. Did you realize that there are, in this area, there are village halls that are built with TIF money? You and I are paying for that. There are fire departments, fire stations that are built with TIF money. These are not economic drivers. Those are not blighted situations. Unfortunately, we're all paying for more of that because the definition of blight is vague. And it hurts every single one of us. And think of it more as the school district. So the school district's the biggest driver in your property taxes. If there's a TIF located in a school district, it really means that everyone else in that school district is going to pay a little bit more for it. I don't want to get too much into it because we could be here all night, and I just want to be respectful of your time. But there's some specific examples, that handouts there, and every single thing we talked about here is going to be on the website. So feel free to use this, to share it with your friends and neighbors, and hopefully.
Let me give a little glimmer of
yeah.
hope. In all this,
You're more positive than me.
We'll give you a glimmer of hope. So, you know what property taxes did in Naperville Township District 203 this year? Okay, one of the largest ones. They went down. Property taxes declined.
Because you got a successful area where you've got some commercial growth.
Right. So we had commercial industrial property outgrew the residential property, and I sit on a finance advisory board for District 203, and we abated the debt service levy of District 203 at a hard-forced recommendation. Okay, hard fought by the administrative of District 203. We reduced that levy. And at turn, we grew the commercial industrial base at more. So that shows you where, on the other side in District 204 of Aurora, on my side, saw $200 and $300 increases in their property tax. And you compound that, there are glimmers of hope. If you get to an equity position from an assessment standpoint, and you can reform that, you in McHenry County will see property tax reduction. And
I will. So Assessor Belak is here for Dundee Township. We've seen a situation where there's some properties that have been rejuvenated and we've had some commercial growth, and there's been a couple years where the property taxes have gone down a little bit, and that is there. Another 2 issues of potential hope, because school funding is the big driver of all this. The state of Michigan, a few years ago, had a very similar system to us. 80% of school funding and local funding came through property taxes, 20% came through the state. In just 1 year, they reversed that. So the state picked up 80% of the tab, local property taxpayers picked 20% of the tab. So there are things like that going on. I know, I didn't see who asked the question, but someone asked a question about a flat 2%. Right now, there is a constitutional amendment being floated to do something similar in Illinois. We'll see if it gets on the ballot for this next year, but that's something that could be very exciting to see if that happens. So there are some of this movements going on. We're having those discussions. For a while there, I've been working on one personally, and there are many, many details to work out. There's complexities to that. I did want to mention the question you had about the tax thing being talked about in Washington right now. I want to point out that is income tax. That is not property tax. If that passes, it's not going to affect our property taxes. And it does actually matter to Illinois to some degree, because Illinois now has some of the highest business taxes in the United States also. When you add that to the highest corporate tax in the world, that has an effect. I mean, we are a big driver of big businesses. I mean, there is ADM, there are many, we'll talk about Amazon. That's the elephant in the room is Amazon might come to Chicago. The amount of jobs that they would offer would be huge. These people would come in and they'd buy up properties, right? We would have demand in our housing market that we have not had in a decade. That would be a big deal for us. But how do we get there? Unfortunately, we have a business climate here that is not very friendly to businesses. And I'm not talking about corporate welfare and things like that. I'm talking about workers' compensation. We have some archaic work rules that definitely are a deterrent. Unfortunately, what's going to happen, instead of changing our workers' compensation system, instead of changing some of these work rules, the governor, Speaker Madigan, President Collier, and the mayor of Chicago are probably going to come to some kind of deal to give them edge credits, tax credits like that. Unfortunately, that takes away from us to some degree. It might equal out, it might benefit us, but many times it hurts us. So a lot of people, I'm going to guess in this room, live in District 300. So I don't know if people remember this because it was a few years ago. Sears, almost 20 years ago, got that EDA, which is basically a TIF. They've got a subsidy there. Some of those things didn't go well. It wasn't really productive, wasn't profitable, and they extended it for another 15 years. Every single person that lives in District 300, even though that's in Hoffman Estates, that's 25 minutes from here, right, pay higher property taxes because of that deal. That's just like a lot of the TIF districts. If you have a legitimately it's a blighted area where improving that facility, and maybe adding some drainage, maybe adding a new roof, adding a new parking lot, might actually attract business, and it could have a benefit to our tax base. But many times that's not the case.
That Sears Hoffman Estates property also had a tax appeal on it. Longest standing tax appeal in Illinois history was back to 2007. It was just settled last year, which is when you have an appeal and you compound it from year to year on a large property like that. And the hospitals were a great notion on this, and that was legislation, not appeal. But you see this compound from one year to the next. The uncertainty of backlogs of appeals too will take a hit in 1 year. So if they win their appeal now, and you've got 8 years, 9 years of refunds that are owed, that comes out in 1 year, and your taxes are going to, those districts and everybody else are substantially going to take a big hit in that particular year for those refunds. So there's some reform that ultimately can be worked on there. So
Yeah.
Many of those businesses, Caterpillar down in Peoria, Sears, threatened to leave the state and leave all their jobs. So, as I proceeded, the state legislature gave into their threats of leaving to give them to us.
Sure. And up until recently, there hasn't been any accountability to keep those jobs. So I wasn't a big favor of the current EDGE extension, even though it passed bipartisan by large majorities. I wasn't really in favor of it because I don't think it's that productive personally. But before that, there was no accountability. So there was supposed to be the deal with Sears. Governor. Actually, ironically, this was before I was even in this business. I bumped into Governor Quinn at O'Hare Airport, and I asked him about this deal, and he wasn't too friendly about it. And he didn't really want to go into details. Frankly, I don't think he knew a lot of details of it. But when it came down, he basically did a handshake agreement with Sears that they're going to keep a certain number of employees there. They never kept those employees there. And, I'm sure that you guys are right, you can read the writing on the wall. Sears is not doing so well. I mean, it's kind of an outdated business model and such. I don't know how long that campus will be operational there. So, unfortunately, we've subsidized that for years, and it's not to our benefit. That's a situation where TIFs don't work. And that's just the reality. Okay. And that's why I still argue that these after the fact little band-aids of corporate welfare don't fix the fundamental problems we have in our business environment here. We should be able to have a balance that you have businesses provide jobs, they provide taxes, the employees provide taxes, and then we can have the services we all want. There's a balance there that we can come to, but unfortunately, a lot of times politicians look at them as a dollar sign on both sides of the equation, because these companies come in and they ask for the credits, right? It's not the companies. They hire a consultant. These consultants are just like those law firms, and they get a piece of that, and we fund that. We fund those bonuses, unfortunately. So this, again, Warren had the TIFs on there. Many of those aren't blighted areas. Many of those are empty lots now. All those construction cranes we hear about, TIF districts. They can be used correctly, but there are many issues with that. We're going to keep on going past. We won't go too much here. We had a couple nice, this is a fun one here. Actually, I'm going to take that back. It's not really fun. This is the foreclosures in McHenry County. And you'll see that eastern McHenry County is littered with foreclosures. And this is just right from Zillow. Actually, I think it's a couple months old, so it may be more now. This shows a little bit of our district here. You can see that Algonquin Township's at far southeast corner of McHenry County. I know some people from Grafton Township might be here. Just want to show that here. It's a very high rate of foreclosures. And then this one, I think John, what was his last name again? Sorry, Julie? Hosdell. Yesterday, he emailed us with this list. Now, this is all publicly available information, but he compiled this for us. So I thought we have to put this in. It's Grafton Township. There's probably only a couple people from Grafton Township here, but it's a great example. And unfortunately, it's small, but we're going to have this on the website. There are some of these tax rates, and I noticed mostly it's for the pensions, that have doubled in the past 10 years. That's a big deal. So these should really be staying similar. If we had growth, they'd be staying similar or going down. So part of this is that our total EAVs, our valuations, have gone down because of the Great Recession, but some of it is because government spending is quite high. And the pensions here are very different than the state pensions or the teacher pensions. Under state law, they're required to levy that so they can basically fully fund those IMRF pensions. So these are going to be funded. Unfortunately, the state pensions and teacher pensions are not fully funded because the state can play games with those numbers. Again, that'll be on the website. We're trying to rush through here a little bit. This is just, again, for Algonquin Township, like an average type of home where your money's going. The big red one there is District 300. Not all of Algonquin Township is in District 300, but just about every property in the village of Algonquin is in District 300. They give you an idea that the huge part of that pie. And then the other ones are much, much smaller. There is room for consolidation and stuff, but just reality is that there's not a lot of dollars there. Helping our school districts save money and getting them funded from the state is a big deal. Now, unfortunately, we don't fund schools very well from the state. Once we fix that, or we've got a road to fix that, not unlike Michigan did, where they swapped it from 80-20 to 20-80, that's going to be a big, big relief. I do support some type of swap. It's really got to be revenue neutral because I don't trust the politicians, but there's a way to do it. So here's a couple examples here in our local area here. This is a good-sized home. The estimated property value is $257,000. That might sell for a little bit more, something sell for a little bit less, but to give you an idea, this particular household is paying $8,400 a year. Here is another one in Cary, a little bit less, but they're almost paying just as much. You can obviously see that there's a lower property value, but $8,300 a year in property taxes. Here is, and this is just giving you a disparity between Chicago and the suburbs, okay? That's a pretty nice house, isn't it? It's not a bad house. It's in a very busy area, very great schools and such. Estimated property value is $294,000. I would venture a guess that it's undervalued. I would guess a property like that could sell for a lot more money. They're only paying $5,000 a year. So literally, you're paying more to your local school district than their entire bill. By the way, that house is owned by Speaker Mike Madigan. And then the second part or a third part of this that I want to get into is so there are inequities in the system, how schools are funded. There are problems in state law that it can only be fixed by a legislature. But there's something that everybody here can do. And if we can keep our local politicians, our local units of government accountable, that'll have a real effect on our property taxes. So there are a bunch of local taxing bodies that have frozen their levies in the last few years, but they can do more. Many of them have increased spending, increased staff counts, even though, you and me, we make the same amount of money as we did in the last few years, yet we're paying a lot more. So we really do need to put pressure on our local school boards and village boards and fire districts that they've got to be responsible with our money. They've got to be responsible with headcounts. They've got to find ways to be creative. And, they can share equipment. They can share services. They can combine. There's no reason why a township road district can't share a little bit with the village. There's no reason that it can't go the other way too. And the same thing is there are school districts that need snow plowing and things like that. They can contract with a township. They can contract with a village. They get things done at a little bit cheaper rate. So there are ways to do this. But we have to put pressure on them, and we have to ask them to do so. If we don't ask, they're going to think that there's no problem, and they can just keep on raising it. Now, we talked a little bit about home rule and the PTEL and stuff. So every single taxing body can raise their property tax levy by 5% or CPI. So CPI has been very low lately. So basically what they do is they peg it a little bit above CPI, and then they get it adjusted down. So we call it taxing to the max, the maximum they're allowed under law. Now, some villages are home rule, and they have really unlimited taxing powers, so they can raise it by quite a bit more. Again, they need accountability there. And that's really up to us. And right now, that's the season that they pass levies. So everything has to be done by the middle of December. So right now is when village boards are talking about that. We have to go and ask and just let them know. And if we show up, it's a lot different than we don't show up. And it has been successful in my town. We've been frozen since 2010. And literally my line item for taxes has gone down 1,000%. Now, it only started out at $300, but now it's like 30. It makes a big difference. So if you can freeze a levy or lower it, and you get a new, industrial investment, that can lower our property taxes. So I want to give people that bit of hope, is that we can control this. And I know that McHenry County's had a move with this. I know the county itself has frozen its tax levy. I believe that School District 47 has frozen their tax levy. So there's ones out there that are willing to work with us. We have to ask. And that's something that I'm prepared to do myself, but everybody else, needs to be aware and keep them accountable also, because we're the ones that elect the people that are there, and they aren't serving for themselves; they're serving us. So I'm hoping tonight we were able to serve you. I'm hoping tonight we answered some questions. We can continue this dialogue. This is a deep and complex issue. We can go much longer, but I do want to be respectful of your time. We're going to have all of these PowerPoints on our website very soon, and just a couple screenshots that would be helpful for you. And just, again, keeping your local politicians accountable, but also friends and family. If you have additional questions, I think we're going to try to wrap up here, but just feel free to talk to me afterwards or call the office. We're more than willing to help. Go ahead.
These are on the website. Do you represent Skillicorn?
Yeah, it should be. Within a couple days, it'll be on repskillicorn.com. I'm going to try to share it on social media, too, because this is really good information. And we are videoing it there, so if everyone wants to turn around and wave to the camera, feel free to go ahead. We are videotaping this. Put this online so you can have the link. And I think we have it on Facebook Live, and it appears that I see a whole bunch of comments there, which will probably take me a couple days to even get through them all. So, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. Keep this open dialogue. We want to answer these questions. This is a passionate issue of mine. I want to be able to serve you guys and help you with these issues. And if someone doesn't fix this system or help you guys, who's going to stay? It's a big deal. And our children are going to stay, our neighbors are going to stay, and we need to grow our state again. We have to turn this around. So thanks for coming, and hopefully the Blackhawks will do well. So have a great night.